To understand the issues addressed in economics, one must have an understanding of macroeconomic systems, and we will also get acquainted with this a little. The quality of economic management can be judged by control parameters. That is, we studied in the sufficient general theory of management. There is a state vector. Society consumes products and services, boards. But here are presented free parameters. But this drag there are some nuances. So, we will often not touch on them. We only state that there is a vector of goals, a vector of the current state. The quality of management can be judged by the error vectors. Society consumes products and services. Both products and services are produced by society based on social cooperation of labor, not division of labor, as we were taught in Marxist-Leninist philosophy. Therefore, the exchange of products in society is a holistic process, and we have examined a scheme where everything is interconnected and interrelated. Products need to be transported. It is necessary to provide electricity for scientific research. And this entire complex is holistic and interdependent on each other rather than each for themselves. What our market players advertise does not possess self-sufficiency, and it cannot exist outside the exchange of products with other similar private enterprises. Therefore, glorifying private enterprises is the most ordinary human folly. And we need to see the role of the credit and financial system as a means of management without structural management. Millions, thousands of producers of various private enterprises. It is unstructured management. This is the injection of certain information when people behave in a predetermined manner. And if we talk about the credit and financial system, if rumors spread that the dollar will soon fall, naturally, everyone starts to manage their economy and financial activities accordingly. If there is stability, then owners invest in the development of their production. But if the overall situation in the country is unstable, then no one will invest in long-term projects. Here are the means of unstructured management, including our restructuring and the tasks that were addressed during that time. That is, I think, now obvious to you. But the credit and financial system can solve various tasks, operate under different concepts. It can capture. It can seize. With its help, one can dominate countries and peoples without giving growth to one's brother, and you will rule over many nations. One concept. And if it is applied for other purposes, then of course the credit and financial system is normal. That is, it is necessary to provide credit to the producer to help him when he needs it. These are already different goals. Credit and financial resources are the means of uniting private enterprises into integrity. Therefore, the credit and financial system is a means of managing the national economic complex, which includes so-called private enterprises. But from this, a normal human question should arise. Where is the self-regulation of the market then? What does it consist of? Once again, we emphasize that the market needs to be managed. It is important to understand the needs of people and what determines the needs of people. The needs of people are determined by their morality. And what needs does a person have? Ultimately, there are two classes of needs. Demographically determined needs. These are the ones that work towards the realization of a person's genetically determined potential for development. That is, what is demographically provided for him personally and for the entire population of people. A person needs to eat, dress, wear shoes, move around and have appropriate housing and so on. And degradation parasitic needs are caused by the immorality and depravity of people. These are vivid representations of these needs. Alcohol, drugs, various sexual needs, perversions, and so on. This relates to the class of degradation parasitic needs, which do not contribute but rather lead to the degradation of a person. And we discussed this while studying the global evolutionary and global historical process. But what is important to understand in this consideration, demographically conditioned needs are predictable. They are useful. And when the national economy is oriented towards achieving them, the output of this system is a useful signal. And degradation parasitic needs are a hindrance. they are not needed at all. Speaking to people, they are unnatural. And when the hindrance suppresses the useful signal, the system collapses. You also know from radio engineering that when you listen to a receiver, the useful signal and noise interfere, and you can't hear the useful signal, even the good songs you need, but hear howling, screeching, crackling, and so on. Therefore, there are two types of needs. Here is the planet Earth drawn. People live on it. And if we orient people's needs towards achieving the demographically conditioned spectrum of needs, we get one society and one relationship between people. If we orient the national economy, its development, its work towards achieving the degradation parasitic spectrum, casinos, bars, party at night, sleep during the day, that is, unnatural needs, we get a different system of society, a different national economy, and accordingly different relationships between people. What is the most important thing? Demographically conditioned needs are predictable. That is, they can be counted how many people there are, how much porridge is needed, how much milk, how many eggs, how many boots. This does not mean that everyone should be dressed like Chinese in identical suits and run around. But there are demographically conditioned needs that are truly necessary for a person. The degradation parasitic ones cannot be counted in any way. What will the wealthy want? Bathe tomorrow in a bath of milk or champagne. Therefore, they are quite unpredictable in many situations and often extremely unpredictable. Management will be sustainable if the process is predictable. Then it can be managed. If the object is unpredictable, it cannot be managed. And this leads to the impossibility of management. It leads to collapse, to destruction. We observe this agony on a global level. Overall, the global economy is approaching a crisis, including a crisis of the global credit and financial system. Therefore, if we compare these needs with types of psyche and the law of time, what do we get in this picture? Look, essentially, according to the principle of time, the speed of information renewal is inherent and genetic and constant, while the social component increases. If the animal type of psyche predominates in society, it is increasingly oriented up to this pseudo-socialism and ultimately towards the growing satisfaction of ever-increasing material needs. And the humane structure of psyche was initially insufficient. Then, now it's all growth, growth, growth. And in order to emerge and ensure the normal functioning of people, needs must be limited. Limited by what? By a demographically determined spectrum. And to suppress interference, that is, we do not need interference. Why? We are talking about the fact that degenerative parasitic needs must be suppressed by various methods and ways so that they do not drown out the useful signal. The macroeconomic system is a system of impulse action. That is, you see here in the picture it is drawn. Production is taking place over a long period of time, and then a momentary deal, the sale of the product to that person. It is instantaneous. That is, practically the tau here approaches zero. The starting point in the activities of the entire national economy complex is agriculture. Bread is the head of everything. The production cycle is considered to be a year based on the birth of bread. Therefore, there is traditionally the formation of the so-called inter-industry balance of exchange products. This inter-industry balance of exchange products shows the distribution of gross output of products from each industry among all industries, plus the final product that each industry ultimately produces. And here, in the picture, it is shown primitively. There is Industry 1, Industry 2, Industry X, or N. This industry produces gross output. This output is used by neighboring industries. You see, for its production, the industry uses the products of neighboring industries and so on. That is, all of this is interconnected. Plus, each industry produces a final product. The interaction of these industries and the products they produce can be represented in natural accounting. And then the system of equations will be like this. If you don't know math, very well. Don't be too upset. Here everything is simply described in formulas. What I clearly drew in the pictures, you can even, if someone, it's hard for a poet to deal with, and that is, relationship of production of products from various industries can be expressed mathematically. That is, through X and Y, but with the corresponding coefficients that are used for the interaction of these industries with each other. This is scientifically called the direct cost coefficient. And final products can be expressed in financial accounting, such as in a natural balance, it's clearly and obviously apparent, but if all this is multiplied by the price of goods in the market, then this is the so-called equilibrium price equation. So we will do it. Everything is described here in vector form, just like what we looked at with X and Y. And for simplification in mathematics, there is a representation of this multiple quantity of various X and Y to simplify perception in vector form. So here is this letter R. This letter R, essentially, specifically denotes the share of added value. What does this mean in terms of added value? Perhaps ETR describes the characteristics of production profitability across the multitude of industries with which one has to interact, and with the spectrum of its gross production, with a certain production culture at specific prices, and this R is essentially subject to credit and financial policy. And ultimately, what does this credit and financial policy depend on? On the activities of production directors through salaries, production reconstruction, distributed funds, and so on. It is subject to creditors who provide loans, insure insurance, and other financial services such as, and so on. And indeed, it is subject to the state or the directors of the concern. That is, this R is a consequence through the state and corporations. These are taxes, grants, subsidies, etc. That is, look, this R, this one, in this formula, in terms of value, it depends on the will of the director, creditors, and the state through taxes, grants, and subsidies. Thus, this R is a vector of the share of expenses, which forms a certain law of value, that is, determines the cost of the product. And this R, its components can be used in a variety of different ways as methods of management and methods of self-regulation of the economy. These are means of adjusting the market mechanism to the appropriate mode of operation. That is, both the enterprise director, creditors, and the state, through salaries, taxes, subsidies, and lending, can adjust the market mechanism to the appropriate mode of operation. And what mode of operation can there be? Here we present stable, unstable, socially acceptable, socially unacceptable, biospherically permissible, biospherically impermissible, unsafe, dangerous. Even from what we have said, let's look at the area where you have knowledge. Dangerous, safe. Look at how miners perish. And that's because production is oriented towards profit, and the owners, so-called temporary managers, they do everything to ensure money comes to them, and they are indifferent to the fate of the workers. They are indifferent even from the perspective of a biospherically permissible regime. Therefore, everything is in the river, there are emissions, and so on. And what determines this? The morality of a person. And this mechanism is still in effect now. That is, whether we want it or not, whether we understand it or not. But ultimately, everything comes down to what? Either this concept or that concept. Which concept do we have now? This one. Why I, and all of us who know the concept of public safety, do not tire of repeating. No problem in our country will be solved now until we change the concept of the country's development. Because all these private problems contributed to the collapse of the country. Because their industry did not give coal. Edports contributed to the collapse of the country. Why? Because their industry gave them to Guyane, US, and the industry because their coal gave them U Okrak Ragohangman. Coal was not supplied to the power plants that generated electricity. Without electricity, the blast furnaces stopped. There are no steelworks, no combines. Everything is in self-destruction. Therefore, in saving themselves and these people, one can understand that they seem to be fighting for their rights and so on. So why are these strikes allowed? Why are they shown on television? Yes, because they contribute to the collapse of the country. And the unstructured say, strike and you will get money. That is, they showed that at one mine they paid out, and immediately others began to declare a hunger strike. These hunger protests, strikes with hunger strikes, what is this? Moreover, people are undermining their health. They are also undermining the entire work. I do not justify the situation, I am just explaining it, that it is actually beneficial. What is the conclusion again? No private problem in the country will be solved until we solve it as a whole, because these strikes are needed by the globalists, these hunger riots and so on, because through them, this is their means of control. That is, for some, war is a mother. For others, it is a homeland. So, based on what we have discussed, what conclusions can we draw? Since taxes, loans, grants, and subsidies are all means of control, it is unacceptable to write tax legislation without understanding. Tax legislation should grant the executive power the right to change taxes, subsidies, and grants during the development of production. What do we have? The separation of powers is an independent branch of power. The legislative power invented taxes, right? And it does not take any responsibility. In production, there is a situation where, for one, production to get on its feet, it needs to be exempt from taxes for a certain period. But the executive power does not have the right. The laws have been invented. Therefore, from this perspective, these are the laws. What did you expect? According to our concept, the executive power should be legislatively allowed to regulate, even for a year or several years, months, to have the opportunity to make decisions on whom to tax and who to reduce taxes for. But for this, the power itself, the people who govern it, must understand this. Why are they doing it? They have now allowed all these officials to take bribes. They will take bribes from this, and even more. That is, this requires again a completely different concept. If all that we are talking about does not exist, then useful products may not be produced, as they cannot be paid for by consumers under the existing law of value. But antisocial yet highly profitable financial products will be produced. This is what is happening to us. Thus, financial profitability and social usefulness do not always coincide. That is, there are things that are necessary for the entire national economy. It is financially profitable to produce vodka. That is, the people drink for the state, and they are fighting. Pay attention. Who will monopolize the production of vodka? The state or a private individual? They are fighting. And what difference does it make? Who will get the people drunk more effectively, a private individual or the state? Who will benefit financially from this? And if this continues, soon there will be no people to sell this vodka to. In other words, not everything that is financially beneficial is socially useful. But with these brainless gaidars, Chubais and Berbelis, what have they done? They have placed financial benefit at the forefront. What follows from this? What is the task of adjusting the credit and financial system? It is necessary for it to be financially beneficial to produce what is socially necessary, regardless of the prices already established in the market. And this also requires a certain concept. And the vector of management goals in macroeconomics should be the demographically determined spectrum of needs. Moreover, here the formula is again depicted in vector form. It is indeed necessary to orient the management of the national economy in such a way that a standard spectrum of needs is ensured. This FD is sufficient. That is, needs must be satisfied or be greater than or equal to, but they should not be less. That's all, to ensure the demographically determined spectrum of needs. Therefore, this F is equal to or greater than F is sufficient, and it can be achieved in various ways, by a multitude, so to speak, of solutions to inter-industry balance tasks. But it is necessary to find a way so that this solution has minimal costs. Therefore, what is drawn here? Specialists probably understood fast. I just want to say that this is a solution to the linear programming problem. It can be solved. This is the task of exchange products, the task of profitability. The exchange product task is in terms of production volumes, while the profitability task is done in prices. So, feasibility cannot be seen in prices. In terms of prices, it will be very profitable to produce. But in terms of the actual product and the interaction of all sectors, it will turn out that it is not necessary to do this. Therefore, what is the conclusion here? There is an exchange product problem and there is a profitability problem. This is a direct inverse problem in economics. One task is to solve for the volumes of production of the product, while the other task is solved in the prices of this product. And in the economics textbook, it states that if the volume of a certain resource in the optimal solution of the direct problem exceeds the constraint, then the price of the resource in the optimal solution of the dual problem is equal to 0. But the profitability problem can be direct, and then the resource problem will be dual. And from this, a very important conclusion follows. If a certain technological process turns out to be unprofitable in terms of prices in the current economic market, then in the optimal solution, its usage is equal to 0. So, I repeat once again, when solving for prices, it may turn out that a certain technological process, that is, the work of a certain industry, may be unprofitable in terms of prices, and therefore, its usage is generally equal to 0. Then, if there is such an industry in the macroeconomic system, its elimination, especially if it is unique and irreplaceable, leads to catastrophe and subordination to other macroeconomic systems, including foreign ones. That is, a formal solution to the problem in scenarios is meaningless. I would like to remind you once again, in this sense of Pushkin, remember how he describes what sustains and enriches the state, and why it does not need gold when it has simple products. Therefore, solving the problem in natural quantities and volumes is inherently more appropriate than in the price system. The problem of profitability, but in the task of exchange products, not prices, all formulas are strictly fulfilled, unlike what we discussed regarding prices. And then, when the necessary spectrum is achieved, sufficient for the demographically determined spectrum of needs, there will be no hype even at 0 prices. And what does that mean? This means, from the perspective of a sufficiently general theory of management, that with the price list of products and services, there is a vector of management error in the macroeconomic system as a whole. In the price list of products and services, there is a vector of management error in the macroeconomic system as a whole. There is a vector of management error in the macroeconomic system. Half an hour ago, we talked about this. Remember when we said that the vector of error is a vector of management error in society as a whole, not just a vector of error in the economy, as many believe, because people work in the economy. This is what Yavlinsky, for example, does not want to understand, who says that only economic issues should be addressed, while there are specific people at the machines, people in design offices, and people managing production. And the economy cannot be effective. The management of the national economic complex of the country can be effective. And management always has a management goal. There must be a vector of goals, that is, a plan, which can be achieved both by a command administrative method and by a non-structured market method, the vector of the current state, managing according to the full function of management. That is, a view of the economy from the perspective of a sufficiently general theory of management puts everything in its place. And our economists, scientists, political scientists, and sociologists do not understand this. And therefore we have a collapse, confusion in our heads, and that is why no one has any porridge in their pots. In essence, the most optimal management strategy is achieved when the prices are effectively reduced to zero. And the real regime is when it fluctuates around certain zero values. That is, the balancing regime either completely coincides with the ideal, or it fluctuates around some state, or it might fluctuate in a stable manner around a certain state. Based on this analysis, what could be the potential price of the product? Functionally, it is a limiter of consumption volume by purchasing power, and in fact, it is a limiter of the number of consumers in conditions of shortage of products and services. That is, on the one hand, prices limit the volumes,